Deputy Director at DANS. And this event today will be the very first edition of a series of roadshows of the FAIRsFAIR project. And after this session today, the roadshow will continue, and its next stop will be Ireland. Here you see today's program, and like the project itself, it has a very strong focus on the implementation of the FAIR principles. You will be presented with talks by partners in the project, by the co-organizer, LCRDM, and by 3 stakeholders of the project. And in between, we will also ask you a couple of questions through a Mentimeter. So please keep your phones close by. As you can see, we have a quite packed program, and we have only 2 hours. So that is why I really wanted to start on the hour and also finish at 1 o'clock. And that also means that we do not have time for real question and answer sessions. So we kindly ask you to put the questions and comments that you might have in the chat, and then presenters can answer your questions after their presentations. Now, before we start with the actual program of today, we would like to start with 2 quick Mentimeter questions already. And those questions are mainly meant to give some context and information to the project and the organizers. So please get your phones, and I will stop sharing the screen so you can see the poll. Oh, the poll is already there. You can see it, right? Can anybody confirm that this is visible for everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So the first question we would like to ask you is, when did you first hear of the term FAIR data principles?
Where can I find the code for the Menti?
I think it's not a Menti. I think I made a mistake there. It's a poll within Zoom, right?
Ah, okay, good. Get it.
So can anybody confirm? I need to stop sharing my screen to make it visible.
Ingrid, it is visible. Thank you.
Oh, but I can't see it then.
I see some answers coming in, so that's... And there is a second question. Thanks for those who remarked that in the chat. Ingrid, let me know when you want to end the poll, please.
I can't see anything, Marjan, so I really don't know.
The poll's been open for 2 minutes. I think that those who were on time in the room have had an opportunity to use it. So I suggest I end it for now. And
wonderful.
Let you continue.
Then we continue. And we will continue with a quick overview of the main characteristics of the project to set the scene a little bit. So here you see those main characteristics in a nutshell. So the project has a duration of 3 years. We just entered the 3rd year. It started in March 2019 and it will run until March 2022. It has a budget of 10 million euro, so it's one of the bigger European funded projects. And on this slide, you can see the 6 core partners who are also work package leads So next to DANS, that's the European University Association, the Digital Curation Center in the UK, STFC also in the UK. We have Trust IT for the communication, who are also facilitating this session today. And we have the Finnish organization CSC. So these are the 6 core partners. But all in all, we have 22 partners in the project, and those 22 partners come from 8 different member states. And I think with this group, we have a very nice diversity of organizations. And as you will see on this screen, we have several Dutch partners in the project as well. Next to DANS, we have SURF and DTL, the Data Tech Center for the Life Sciences, and the University of Amsterdam. So the objective of FAIRsFAIR is really to provide practical solutions for the use of the FAIR data principles. So it has a very practical aspect to it. And there is a big emphasis on fostering FAIR data culture and also the uptake of good practices in making data fair. So it's a very pragmatic project. And there is also a very strong link with the realization in Europe of the European Open Science Cloud. So this EOSC is being created now, and that needs to become within Europe the virtual, federated and trusted environment where we share data, store data, analyze data. And that environment really is aimed to cut through borders, but also through disciplines. And the mission of FAIRsFAIR is to implement the FAIR principles in the policies, the practices, the data, and the services that will be available in this European Open Science Cloud. So another way of looking at that objective of the project is to say that it is really meant to implement a set of recommendations that became available in 2018. And those recommendations really are about the implementation of FAIR, and they are part of a report called Turning FAIR into Reality. And that report was written by a group of experts on FAIR data, and that was all in the context of the European Open Science Cloud. So really this project is meant to implement the FAIR principles within the European Open Science Cloud. Having said that, that means that the project is active in a very complex environment and is focused on targets that are still certainly partially moving around. They are not yet set in stone for all aspects. This is an overview to illustrate this crowded EOSC landscape. You can see that there are many projects and there is also not yet a very stable EOSC governance structure. So I'm not going to dive into the details of this slide, but you know, in a bird's eye view, you can see that this is quite complex. There are many players around that all have relationships with this project, with whom we need to align and with whom we need to work. So that is one of the biggest challenges of the FAIRsFAIR project. Our main instrument to navigate that you could say turbulent sea is our synchronization force. This is an internal body of the project, and it is really aimed at liaising and engaging and aligning with our external partners, be it projects, be it the EOSC governance structure, be it initiatives also outside of Europe, because FAIR is of course all over the world. One of the achievements of this group is the overview that you see here. This presents, you could say, a kind of snapshot in time of the level of implementation by all of these EOSC projects of the 27 recommendations that I just mentioned that were made with regard to implementing the FAIR principles within the EOSC. So I'm not going to dive into the details, but this slide and the one before really show you the complexity of the landscape that we're in. So what is this project really about? Here you see an overview of the different work packages that we have. And you can see that next to the cross-cutting ones, project management and engagement and communication, we have two work packages that really focus on FAIR policies and FAIR practices. And that is both in a more technical way around semantics and software and interoperability, etc. And also more related to, let's say, policies focused on leadership of research performing organizations, focused on funders, etc., those stakeholders. Then we have a big work package around certification, also a very important aspect, and creating, defining criteria for FAIR enabling repositories. And then we have two work packages really focused on FAIR training and professionalization, also within universities. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, many of the activities in the project are really cutting across more than one work package. Like I said, we just entered yesterday the third year and the final year of the project. And of course, we already produced a lot of output. Here you can see a snapshot from Zenodo. If you search on FAIRsFAIR, you will get at the moment 84 hits. So we have 84 results published there. They are all, of course, openly available. And on the left-hand side, you can see the type of output. So there are a lot of publications, of course, but also other materials. So there is a lot available. This is another overview of the main outputs of the project. As you can see, I've taken a couple of snapshots from screenshots from the website. We provide a lot of support to all kinds of stakeholders, for example, to organizations when it comes to FAIR policies. We have support programs for repositories to get certified, to become more FAIR enabling. We also have a lot of work around data practices, around FAIR semantics and interoperability, like I said, around FAIR services. Also in the area of training for European higher education, but also in the area of data stewardship. We produced a couple of tools already. You will hear more about that today, later on. And of course, we also organize many events. So I would like to invite you all to have a closer look at the project website to see whether there is any material that is of use for you. So the project also receives vital support from two bodies. First of all, we have a high-level advisory committee, and that committee consists of a group of international experts who deliver their advice and comments on the strategy of the project and the implementation as well. And they have played also a major role already in the review of the project halfway down the line. And we also, next to that, have a group of European FAIR champions. And these are scientific experts and really doers in the field of FAIR data. And they work as our FAIR ambassadors. And we are very glad that today you will hear some of them speak in this event. So finally, I want to advertise a little bit our upcoming FAIRsFAIR Week 2021, which is an event that will take a whole week, which will consist of a couple of internal events. But there is also a public workshop planned. So I would like to invite all of you to join us there. And that event will take place on Tuesday morning, April 13. And the program is already available online and you can also register there. So if you find this event today useful and interesting, please come to us on the 13th of April. And with that, I'd like to end this presentation. We will continue now. If you have any questions based on this presentation, please put them in the chat. Comments are welcome there as well. And we will continue now the program with our next speaker, and that is Margriet Miedema. She is the coordinator of LCRDM, the National Network for RDM Experts in the Netherlands. And Margriet will introduce the Do I Pass for FAIR tool, which is a self-assessment tool for organizations. So Margriet, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. And actually I had a small chat with Marianne in between because some of you asked for the outcome of the poll. So Marianne, would you like to, yeah. So, we see, actually it's if you don't want me to analyze it very quickly, but maybe from 2017, most of you have heard of the FAIR data principles. And Marianne, is there a way we can see the answers to question 2?
I'm trying to show you the answers to question 2, but you obviously can't see them. That question was, what describes your role best? And there we see that 57% ticked the option of data support staff. And the second largest group is other. We're not going to ask you what other means. We have a good 10% researchers, 10% data policy makers, and no research funders were there, or at the moment we asked the question, or they didn't want to identify themselves as such. So mainly data support staff, therefore.
Thank you. And in between, we got some hints on how to see this. Now I have to find my presentation. What I would like to share with you today is the Do I Pass for FAIR? And it's the outcome of a LCRDM task group. And I think, oh, it's running by itself, and that I do not want. I will do it like this. I'm sorry. I wanted to start with saying FAIR seems to be everywhere. And you have you see the second line, we want to be fair in 5 years' time. And this was expressed by at least 2 rectors from universities in the Netherlands. And they said, I want to be a fair organization. And of course, it's nice to say this to your data support staff, but you have to question yourself, what would then be a fair enabling research organization? You see our definition. We start with it today, but actually it was the end of the task group. And look at a few things. It says, okay, you are a fair enabling organization if you have dedicated staff with policies and with services, and to the end to enable the researchers to create and publish fair data. And this is as good as a definition as anything else, because what is then dedicated staff? What is then the organizational facilities one would need? So the task group said, okay, we want to come up with a definition. Here it is, work in progress. But we also want to come up with a tool so that people within a research performing institute can assess themselves whether they are a fair enabling research organization. You can find the tool on the LCRDM website. We have named it Do I Pass for FAIR? And the I Pass is a mixture of all the letters which started because we said, okay, if you want to assess your organization, you have to check in different areas how well you are doing. So we said, okay, look at policies, services, skills, incentives, and adoption. And you can see if you mix those letters, you get I Pass. It's a self-assessment tool. That's how we started off. And I'll take you to this one. It has 19 multiple choice questions, 3 open questions, and you can't read it and you don't have to read it right now, but you can imagine that our idea was, okay, you ask a question and people assess themselves whether they are at a beginner's level, at an intermediate level, or at an advanced level. But then when are you a beginner? Some people who are advanced would say that they are beginners just from their point of perspective. So we try to have some criteria so that you can say, okay, if I am doing this and this and this in my organization, I'm actually quite advanced. And this part of the criteria, that took most time. The questions to ask on these 5 areas was maybe not so difficult, but really to decide, okay, then you're a beginner. And when we made the questions, we had a prototype of this tool and we did personal interviews so that we could actually discuss the different levels. This is a tool. You can do this individually. It's available as an interactive PDF. But then people, when they had filled out this tool, they said, oh yeah, but how am I doing comparing to the others? So that's when we decided to turn the tool into a survey. The survey ran in the last 2 weeks of December and the first 2 weeks of January this year. We asked 24 institutes to participate. 20 of them completed it. And it's anonymous because people don't like public benchmarks. But you can compare yourself with unknown others. So it has the advantage of a benchmark, but it doesn't have the pain from a benchmark. It's the results, I want to share some of it, are from 13 universities, which is almost all, I think maybe, well, I shouldn't name names, but I think one who didn't. 5 academical hospitals, the UMCs, 1 University of Applied Science, and KNW NWO Institute. As I said before, 90 multiple choice questions, 3 open questions. And the time to complete it depends a bit on the person, of course, who answers it and how well he or she does know their organization, but 1 hour at least. Survey outcomes. Most of them will not surprise you because most institutes assess themselves as intermediate or advanced in the policy area. But you can read this later on. But on adoption, I think it's interesting that actually most indicated, and we'll get into a little bit of detail, hardly have an overview of the amount of data generated in their institutes. I will go quickly for time, I think. I also think this is interesting. We have 20 answers of the 24 institutes approached, and 70%, it's funny, I should explain. Blue is you assess yourself at the beginner's level. Red, you assess yourself at an intermediate level, and orange is advanced. You can see the criteria on the right-hand side, but actually 70%, so that would be 14 respondents, say we are still in the process of recognizing different roles within data stewardship. Another question, if you look at how many FTE is responsible or available for scientific staff, it's also that maybe half assess themselves at intermediate, but these are again criteria you can discuss, because we said, okay, you're intermediate if you have 1 full-time employee in relation to 100 to 500 scientific staff. I know some people say you should have 1 data steward for 30 researchers. So if that's true, we're far away from that result. Another question, and here it comes to adoption. 84% says less of 20% of our publications contain a reference to underlying data. It surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't have. And actually the ones who assess themselves at the intermediate level are the academical hospitals. They have a closer overview. And then this was DOIS with publications. And then here, if you look at how much data, or do you have an overview of all the data which is generated within your organization? And then 70%, and we didn't ask the one who's responsible for the telephones within the university, but 70% we have no idea, but I assume we have an overview of less than 20%. Now I'm out of the survey, and we presented the whole idea of the tool at the networking day in November. And this is one of the open questions. So it's not 20 who answered, but I think 84 people. And we asked, what are your organization's most important challenges in becoming fair enabling? And you see awareness stands out, even if, and also you have to include the awareness right there, which is written a bit differently. I'm coming to my last slide. The next steps, we are translating it now into Dutch, and more institutes will be asked to fill out. Some of the people who contributed indicated it's also nice to do this, not me myself, but with my colleagues, because we do not have a same view of how well we are doing. So that's also interesting that we didn't think of it when we started, but it's nice it's being used that way. Following the data on adoption, there's a new pitch for a new task group coming on fair data practice. How can you get grip of all the data generated within your institute? And of course, we are interested to see what things are changing, because the last question was, what's on your roadmap for the coming year in becoming fair enabling? So we hope that everything which is blue now will be orange or red next year. Thank you. Which means I have to look at, I will stop sharing, because then I can give the floor to the next person, and that would be Marianne. Marianne is going to, well, she works at DANS, as I think most of you will know, and she leads the synchronization force in FAIRsFAIR, and she will talk about assessing a moving target.
Thank you, Margriet. Can you please confirm that you can hear me and see the screen? Okay, yes. Thank you. So, good morning once again. Margriet spoke about a tool to assess for organizations to what extent they enable more fair data. I will also talk about measuring and assessing fairness, but focus that on the fairness of data sets. And I must say that the work I will present was done by my colleague Ilona van Steen and the colleagues in her work package within FAIRsFAIR. So even if you don't hear her, I owe thanks to her for the content and the slides. The tools I'll talk about are the Fuji tool and FAIRaware. And I'll talk mainly about Fuji for two reasons. You will have time to take a look at FAIRaware yourself later on. And maybe more strategically, I like to focus us on existing data sets. So in the past years, all of us have put a lot of effort into making data fair. And sometimes there may be the risk that we forget that there are already thousands and thousands of data sets within repositories. And it might be interesting to see how fair they are. So that's why I will focus on Fuji mainly. But it all starts with metrics. And metrics brings me to this overview of what Ingrid already mentioned, the report on how to turn FAIR into a reality, a report from 2018. It touched upon many aspects of FAIR. You can see them here on the screen. It's a whole ecosystem, you could say. And within this ecosystem, all the components that are needed to support FAIR data objects. That's why the data objects are highlighted here. In FAIRsFAIR, we implemented 3 components that directly refer to recommendations made in this Turning FAIR into Reality report, the recommendation to develop metrics and to facilitate automated processing and automated assessment, you could say. Let's start with these metrics before I move on to the tools themselves. What you see here, and what you probably can't read, but you can go to the website, is a set of 17 core metrics to evaluate the fairness of data objects. You could call them minimum viable metrics. To measure these data that are already within trustworthy repositories. We think in FAIRsFAIR that trustworthy repositories are essential to complement and enable fairness. You've probably heard this before, but repositories can help you by assigning persistent identifiers for the data sets to help curate the data, to keep them reusable over time, to support with metadata and so on. So that is where we like to match, or think it is essential to match, with repositories. Based on prior work, for instance, by an RDA maturity model working group, we identified or refined the metrics. We're now in the 4th iteration, and it will continue to be updated and made more specific and more effective. So these are the metrics, but metrics by themselves, of course, don't do anything. They are just statically there. That's why we embedded them in the Fuji tool. The Fuji tool runs practical tests against those 17 metrics. And it was initially assigned or designed for programmatic assessment, that is assessment by machines, not by humans. Now, of course, one prerequisite for Fuji to be used, it can only work if the repository where we want to test the data sets allows this kind of access. So it's not immediately possible to test the whole world of repositories and the data set within them. On the other hand, Fuji has been developed in such a way that it does not only look at the metadata and the data within those accessible repositories, but it also consults other sources like DataCite and schema.org to find extra information about the data sets. Here you see 2 channels, you could say. Fuji was designed and initially for machine actionable work, so programmatic assessment of data sets. And on the left-hand side, you see a very short part of the kind of feedback in JSON format you get. The source code is available on GitHub. When you're interested for your repository, you can take a look there. And you're also welcome to contact us to give us feedback, or if you want help to deploy that code. But there's also the alternative access way, the graphical user interface, which is more human-friendly. You see a screenshot on the right-hand side. And there you can even enter a simple DOI for a particular data set, for instance, and you get a pretty long list of scores with explanation of why the specific tests passed or failed. And that, especially the failure, of course, is then again input for perhaps changing the way how the repository presents the information, or how the original data producer documented the data, and so on. In a recent presentation, my colleague Mustafa Moran, also from the FAIRsFAIR project, said, and I want to copy that, that you should take these percentages with a pinch of salt. So we know that some repositories do have information, for instance, on the available licenses of a particular data set, but that doesn't mean that it's always accessible for the Fuji machinery when it accesses that repository. So yes, the score is an indicator, but it's not the whole truth. And you could say that there is always a story behind those numbers, and it's good to look for that story. We are actively looking for the story ourselves in the collaboration with the pilot repositories that run the Fuji tool. It's a consultancy trajectory, you could say. So we talk with those repository teams, they talk with us, and so on and so forth. You see here, by the way, also the logo of FAIRsFAIR Netherlands that is participating in the pilots. I don't know if there are any results already. I think it's still in progress. Now, like with the metrics, with tools like this, FAIRsFAIR is not the only one who works on it. There are many more initiatives. You see here a couple of logos from other European projects, EOSC Synergy, EOSC Nordic. We collaborate and we are looking for alignment. Last November, we organized a workshop, a collaborative workshop with also members from the European Commission, and it was part of their message as well, so that we all should aim for a kind of convergence that and see where we can find common approaches, or at least know about each other's approaches, and also use that for validating the particular initiatives. Now, what is good to keep in mind with all of these developments, fairness is a moving target. Fairness is not black and white, but it's rather a continuum. A fair assessment can only be a snapshot in time, so that's a reason to be careful. And you could say even worse, the automated assessments should be interpreted with caution, like I gave an example. So here my motto, numbers need a narrative. This is the moment where I stop with the Fuji tool and move on to FAIRsFAIR. And FAIRsFAIR is much more of an educational tool. It is not a real assessment. It is not as harsh, you could say, as Fuji. It asks researchers in principle, but also data stewards, how aware they are of the different aspects that need to be satisfied before you deposit your data to a repository. So you realize this tool fits in another point of the data lifecycle than the Fuji tool. In fact, this is all I want to say about it, because I'm going to give you a web address where you find the FAIRsFAIR tool. And you can check that out for yourself. So let me see. It is best, yeah, I should say that it's best you take a particular data set in mind before you go to the tool. So that can be a data set you're familiar with, or one of the two. We gave some examples here on this screen, on the screen. You have 10 minutes. So we just be silent, I think, for the next 10 minutes, leave you some time to have a look at this tool. It's a kind of interactive break. So if you really need another coffee, go and get some. And we will reconvene 10 minutes before the hour. And then we will ask you how you like the FAIRsFAIR tool. So enjoy it. And I will stop sharing this screen. So please make sure that you have the links either locally or in the chat. Enjoy your exploration. It's 10 to 12. Let's start again centrally within the Zoom room. We can't check your activity on the FAIRsFAIR site, or maybe we can, but I don't know about it. So I hope you all are very engaged and liked what you saw. I have a quick poll again for you, and you should be able to see that now. But then I should, of course, not show you the first poll, but the second one. And we're asking this very simple question to share with the colleagues who are developing and revising the tool. It's not so much for discussing it now. I still see scores coming in. And I see also suggestions in the chat. I think that is a good idea to give us any comments you may have, like Ruud is doing in the chat, and we'll be happy to share it with the colleagues. I think some of those colleagues are in this room actually, so they can see it for themselves. Okay, I'll end this poll. Thank you for your comments. And you can see, I think, that nearly half of the respondents give 4 stars, which is pretty nice, I would say. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll end this poll, and then I invite Ingrid to continue with the program.
Thanks very much, Marianne. Now it is time for a next block in our program. And for that, in that block, we will have a view on the project and on FAIR in general from 3 of our experts and champions. And they represent 3 stakeholder groups of the project: the funders, the publishers, and the researchers. And the first speaker in this section is Maria Cruz. She works at the Dutch research funder NWO as policy advisor Open Science. And before that, she was active in the area of research data management at Delft University and the VU. And she will speak today about where NWO stands in its journey towards FAIR. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, let me unmute and start sharing. I think this is the one. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, I can see it.
Great, thank you. Hi, so I'm going to talk about where does NWO stand in the journey to FAIR. Oops. Yeah. Sorry. So I'm Maria Cruz. I work at NWO. I'm replacing Stan Gillen, who couldn't be here today because of the NWO hack, or the hack to NWO. I'm a policy advisor on open science, and I manage our RDM policy. And at the moment, because our servers are down, the best way to contact me is via Twitter or LinkedIn. FAIR, the first thing I'd say is that FAIR is a journey, and in particular the cultural change around data sharing is a journey. And I'd say you see in the slide an actual road, And I'd say that actually in this road to FAIR, given the diversity of research cultures and research communities, not everybody is traveling at the same speed and using the same means. Some communities are perhaps farther ahead. Maybe they are traveling in a very comfortable car that can go at high speed. And perhaps others are just struggling walking on the road. And as I was filling in the FAIR awareness tool, I realized I'm very aware of all the concepts, but when you come to the likelihood, for example, are you aware that you need to apply a community standard to your data? Sure, but if you come from a community where you don't have a community endorsed metadata standard, you may be aware of it, but you may not be able to do it. So FAIR is a journey, and funders play an important role in this journey by promoting responsible data management and data preservation, sharing, and curation. In other words, FAIR, but FAIR is also, you have to interpret it according to your situation, according to your research community and the standards in your community. I couldn't resist, yet FAIR is fair. Apologies if you don't like this sort of puns. Or I'd say even FAIR is fair enough. And why do research funders care so much about FAIR? Well, we care when we, as funders, we want to ensure that the money we put into research leads to knowledge sharing and innovation. We want to make sure that the research we fund is reliable and transparent, and also it will lead to follow-on research and opportunities for collaboration. So basically, it's about getting a return on investment. And it's clear that just open data, just putting data out there without it being well documented and annotated, if it's not discoverable and accessible, if it doesn't integrate easily with other data, then it's going to be difficult for that data to fulfill its promise. And so that's why NVO and other funders care about FAIR. NVO and FAIR data. NVO has embraced the FAIR principles in its policies since since 2016. And the main motto is data as open and as fair as possible, as closed as necessary. When the policy was introduced in 2016, the main goal was to raise awareness. And in I think all of you are very, if I look at the list of participants, I think you are all very familiar with NVO policies on research data management. So basically, since 2016, it involves a data management section in research applications, in grant applications, and then for proposals that are awarded, for projects that are awarded funding, a data management plan at the beginning of the project. NVO has also contributed in 2018 to harmonizing and aligning research data management policies in Europe, being very aware that researchers are very mobile and that it causes confusion that different funders and different institutions if they have different data management policies. So NVO has contributed together with Science Europe to align policies. And in 2020, this year, we implemented a data management plan that is consistent with the guidance from Science Europe in order to make it easier for researchers to comply with funders' policies in data management. Another way NVO is helping out is by providing funding for capacity building in research support. So as you all know, I'm sure, NVO has funded local digital competence centers in universities and other public research institutions that are publicly funded. And since about this year's, actually since 2019, we are trying to go beyond just funder mandates. We cannot have FAIR by decree. It's not possible given the complexity. We have just heard about the complexity. We heard about the complexity, the complex landscape of stakeholders. We heard about it's a whole ecosystem. We heard all these words. So we're not going to get there with FAIR by decree. We just funder mandates. So since 2019, we are trying to lead by example by implementing incentives and recognition for open science, including FAIR data. And we've done this we have signed the DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, in 2019, and have been implementing it in many calls. This year, actually last year in December, we launched an Open Science Fund to stimulate open science. I'll say a little more about the Open Science Fund. It supports projects in open science, among others, projects that improve how research outputs are made fair and reproducible. And the idea is with the NVO Open Fund is also like with the FAIR champions, with the FAIRsFAIR champions, we also want to identify the sort of open science champions in the Netherlands and help them, give them visibility and help them to change research culture in the Netherlands. I think that's all I have. These are some further reading. This is a very short presentation. So if you want to learn more, I recommend these two articles here on the right. There are further references, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them on the chat. And I put my NVO email address down there, but it's not functional at the moment. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that, Maria. And it's of course great to hear that NVO is not only focusing on the sticks, but is also putting effort into creating the carrots to create a fair culture also among researchers, and is focusing on funding for open science and other incentives. So if anybody has any questions or comments, again, please use the chat. And now it's time to move over from the funder's journey towards FAIR to hear more about the journey that the publishers are undertaking to get to a further implementation of FAIR. And we have a duo presentation now on our program from our FAIRsFAIR champion, Eefke Smit. She is the Director of Standards and Technology of the STM Association, an international umbrella organization for publishers, both for-profit and not-for-profit. And she will speak together with her colleague, Joris van Rossum, who is the Director Research Integrity of the same organization. And they will talk about STM's Research Data Year. So the floor is yours, Eefke.
Thank you, Ingrid. And as Ingrid said, it will be Joris and myself doing this presentation. Let me first try to share my screen. I hope you can see it like this. It's a very full
Can you put it in
slide.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okie doke. It's a very full slide, but it's also our only slide for the next 10 minutes, and we'll take you through it. I will cover the first 5 minutes about what we've been doing as STM so far, and then Joris will tell you more about the plans that we have for this year and for the future in general. And before I start, let me explain a little more about our organization. We are a member organization of international publishers in the field of science, technical and medical publications. We have around 150 members around the world, and we have members in all sorts, shapes and sizes. You'll find the big well-known publishers there, but you also find a long list of society publishers, university presses, open access publishers, for-profit, not-for-profit, anything and everybody you can think of. And jointly, our members publish around 70% of all the scholarly information worldwide in journals and in books. And as STM, we've been active in the area of research data already for a long time. I looked it up. It started in 2011, so it's exactly 10 years. We're also honored and feel privileged that FAIRsFAIR chooses as one of the FAIR data champions. We're very proud of that, and we'll do everything to live up to that title. And after many years of all kind of contributions to getting more sharing of data in place, we decided to dedicate 2020 as the research data year. And I think that our story dovetails nicely into the story we just heard from Maria Cruz from NVO. Because in the many surveys that we do among researchers, we find that they see two important types of organizations from whom they would like help, of whom researchers like help in the area of research data. And those are funders at the one side and publishers at the other side. And if I say one side and the other side, I really mean at the start and at the end of every research cycle. So funders can give an enormous push at the moment that a research project is started to make sure that the research data is treated well. And then when the project is ready to be published, then it is publishers who can also give a lot of help. And what did we do in the research data year? Our main aim there was to increase the implementation and adoption of a lot of good stuff that had been developed over the years. And there I also see a lot of similarities with what FAIRsFAIR is trying to achieve. I liked the acronym of IPASS because it starts with information, then policies, then adoption, supplying services, increase the skills level, and that will help researchers share more data. And that is also exactly what we try to do in this research data year. We had as motto, share, link, and cite, to increase the sharing of research data at the moment of publication, the linking between data and publications, and the citation of data, also to make sure that researchers get their reward for their work on the data. And to help publishers set in place the right policies and the right services, we set up this research data year. The uptake of it was enormous. We have 21 participating publishers in the program. You see their logos here. You'll notice that all the big publishers are among them, and also several medium-sized publishers. Behind some of the names, there's even a longer list of society publishers. And jointly, these publishers, we made the calculation, publish more or less 50% of all the journals around. And as you can see in the blue box, there are 13,000 participating journals now in this program. And what do these journals do? They have agreed to set in place policies for data sharing. And you'll see a purple dashboard on the left-hand side, immediately below the headline of the poster. And as you can see, of the publishers who participate here, roughly 29% of their journals in their catalog had data policies. And at the end of the year, that had grown to 52%. So less than 1/3 when we started and more than half at the end of the year. And of course, that number is still growing, but it is something that takes some time to be put in place. And if you look at the articles that contain a data availability statement, At the start of the year, that's the little dashboard needle at the left bottom side of the picture. At the start of the year, that was in 7% of the articles, and we managed to double that in the year to 15%. You could say 15% is still not so much, but well, on the other hand, you know, it's 1 in every 6 articles, more or less. And of course, that is also a needle that we want to see going up further. Then there's another purple box that says journals that connect to Scholix. Scholix is something that we actively promoted and developed in joint collaboration with Crossref, with DataSite, and with OpenAir. And Scholix is a reference framework to enable linking between publications and the data sets. And in the first half of last year, around 1/3 of the journals was connected to Scholix. And at the end of 2020, that had grown with another third to more than 40%. And we want to see that grow even more. We're very well aware that publishers are not the only player in this ecosystem. We're only one of the many players who can help and encourage researchers to do more. So we work together with a number of partners. You see a box of partners right in the middle of the poster. FAIRsFAIR is, of course, an important partner. That's why we're here now. Also, the Center for Open Science. We do a lot with Crossref. We do a lot with Repeta. And of course, we're a very active member in the Research Data Alliance. And we also work with Chorus in the US. What we do is we have at least 1 meeting a month. Sometimes these are meetings just for publishers to share experiences between them and to decide on common practices. And but we also do a lot of webinars with other partners. You see several of them mentioned here: funders in the US, funders in Europe, data repositories. And that is also something that I would like to give as a message here. From the many surveys that we do among researchers to ask them what they need and what they would like to see to make data sharing easier, is we keep seeing a consistent pattern of the organizations that matter most to them. And as I already said, on the one hand, that's funders. Secondly, it's publishers. They like to see clear data policies from journals. The third organization is repositories. So it's very important that there's a good infrastructure of reliable repositories where researchers can actually deposit their data. And of course, the last organization, and not the least, is their own employer, the Research Institute that supports them. So in general, maybe you're asking why are publishers doing this? Because we saw at a very early stage how the addition of data really enriches publications. And there are also many surveys and even studies done to show that citations go up a lot for articles that actually supply the data sets. So that is one reason. And the other reason is that we want to be a responsible player in this whole ecosystem. Funders are asking for it, researchers are asking for it, and it will help to achieve an environment with more open science. What I would also like to emphasize is that publishers can play an important role in this ecosystem. For example, adding persistent identifiers, adding the right metadata. Those are typically core elements and core skills that publishers contribute to scholarly communications. And that is also very important. I didn't hear the word mentioned yet, but reproducibility is a very important theme. And as publishers, we think that it's important to have data there to encourage and prove the reproducibility of published research. In general, it fits our vision to advance trusted research. And with that, I would like to hand over to Joris. Joris, are you there? And Joris will tell us more about how we want to continue our activities on research data. Joris, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just got a hint that I have to make it as short as possible. So,
oh dear, sorry.
let me try to do that. So thank you. So I will just spend a few words talking about the next year, because the most important message here is that we're going to continue. We had the research data year, but it evolved into a research data program. First of all, because of its success in adoption, but also, as the previous speaker said, research data is a journey. So although we see a lot of very positive results this year, we're going to continue, and hopefully next year we can show you a dashboard with even better figures there. Also to mention there, we have a dashboard where you can see the progress on the adoption of the various policies and tools we implement, and we also have a website with more information. The focus for next year, aside from getting more publishers on board and getting those figures up, 3 things. First of all, we talked a lot about policies, but culture is equally important. And of course, the researchers are a very important factor here. How can we incentivize the researchers to share data? Well, being linked and cited is a very important aspect here. So we're going to focus a lot on the infrastructure, helping publishers to submit the right metadata to organizations like Crosscraft to make sure that the research data is cited and published, again, according to our information, according to our the surveys. Very important factor for authors to share the data. Second, funders. As Maria said, funders are increasingly promoting FAIR data. They're increasingly mandating FAIR data, but also there's a harmonization taking place, very important. But again, we are part of one big ecosystem, so we as publishers have to also harmonize our policies with that of the funders to ensure that the researchers are experiencing a unified policy. So that's going to be an important focus. A third focus is on repositories. The moment of publication, of submitting an article, is also a moment where the researchers often store their data in repositories. So we want to make sure as publishers that we can direct the researchers to the right repositories, the certified repositories. So we're working on ensuring that publishers have the tools to suggest or give an idea of what kind of repositories are available to them to make the process as smooth as possible. The last thing I want to mention is that we are also engaging with a lot of organizations like FAIRsFAIR, like funders, etc., on a variety of topics. One of them is on data curation. Of course, in a very important topic where a lot of players play a role. Of course, the data curation managers at the institutions, of course, the repositories, but also, of course, we as publishers have a lot of experience with data curation and data peer review. So we are, again, assessing, looking at the ecosystem, seeing what we could do together. And one example, in our next publishers meeting, which is an open webinar for all publishers, we will have actually a presentation about the Fuji tools that could be used and adopted by publishers as well. So again, maybe to summarize, getting those figures up, we're also a very practical program, really trying to get those figures up, but also engaging, like we did last year, with many of you around FAIR data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eefke and Joris. And it's good to see that the chat is really being used to ask questions and comments. So please continue doing that. And in the meantime, we move on with the program. And the final speaker in this section is, again, a much appreciated champion of the project, Antitja Kulina. And in hindsight, I was thinking that perhaps we should have started this block even with Antitja, because I think she represents really the most important stakeholder for our FAIRsFAIR project, but I think in general when we talk about FAIR implementation, because she is a researcher. Antitja holds a Vini research fellowship at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology, and she works on several projects related to open science in ecology. And she will now talk about FAIR versus open from a researcher's perspective. So the floor is yours, Antitja.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'll just share my presentation. I'm sharing the wrong slide. Just a second. I was just looking at the project that was presented. Okay, here it is. Well, first, thank you for inviting me to give a researcher's perspective on this topic of FAIR data. And I come from an ecology and evolution research community, and I think our community is compared to some other research areas. We have to deal with actually very diverse study systems. So it's very complex actually to get to the point of FAIR data. And when I started to work in the area of open science in 2016, back then I equalized open data with FAIR data, and I even wrote a paper where I defined FAIR data and open data as equal. But with time, I think these two terms have diverged, and we now see that researchers, but also publishers and funders, they see distinction between FAIR and open. And recently, I put a Twitter poll to ask researchers within ecology and evolution, what do they find more important for scientific progress? And majority said it is FAIR data, not the open data, or they're equally important. And this is because I think a lot of researchers still see FAIR data equal to open data. But when asked what is more easy to achieve, they all said it's open data that's easier to achieve, because to open data, it's, I think, more about the cultural change, where you just have to convince researchers this is the best for them to share their data openly. But to achieve FAIR data, that requires much more technical support than just the open data. So researchers find FAIR data more important, but more difficult to achieve. And I go through one example of specific type of data, which is data on birds. And these data have been collected in many populations for many years. So here you see some populations for in White Woods in Oxford, where I did my PhD. They've been collected for 60 data. And these populations, they have individuals that are marked, so you can follow them over their lifetime. And these studies are based on what we know about evolution and ecology of animals in the wild. And you can follow their breeding success, which is very important to connect that to some selective pressures, for example. And there are many populations monitored across the world in a very similar way. So they all use quite similar types of field records, of course, adjusted to a specific habitat. And this is just for Eurasia here, or more towards Europe. And one example here from the Netherlands, you see 6 different species, and data have been collected since 1960s. So these are great data. This is number of breeding pairs in this specific population. So I can just, say one use of this data could be to see how population size fluctuates over time. And then you can later relate to, for example, climate change. And today is becoming more important to be able to combine data from different populations, because ecologists, we strive to, of course, understand what happens locally, but we also want to know what are the global patterns. So how much can we extrapolate our results, especially in the age of, big changes such as climate change or anthropogenic changes. So do they influence life on Earth in the same way everywhere? But the issue in combining data is that you have all of these different ways that people are coding their variables, storing their data in really amazingly different number of formats. And also some groups do quality checks on the data, for example, to exclude some impossible values that maybe somebody wrongly recorded in the field, but some groups don't do that. So you get a very heterogeneous data in terms of how they're stored and what's their quality. So if you try to combine this data, I tried, and it's very difficult, and some people even just give up on combining many populations. So how to bring this research community together? So that was my personal question. I wanted to bring this research community together to create FAIR data. My first consideration is that researchers don't want to share their long collected data openly. And I understand why, because I've talked to many of them. Second is that they do want their data to be used, and they do want to use others' data, but they want this to be under their control, so not by default. And finally, they all see the benefits of a common data format, as I explained before, but they don't have capacity in terms of finances, in terms of skills, or just time to change their data format into some common standard. And this is exactly what we've done for this project, with we're trying to actually unite all the data from all these different populations of birds. Currently, we are mostly focused on Europe, but we are now spreading to America. We have 2 populations from America. We have 1 population from New Zealand. So what we do, we have researchers, they collect the data in the field. Then they send us what we call primary data. And then our team, we have a co-developers team of 4 people. They write pipelines in R at this point to standardize these data and to do quality checks on data to make the data fair. And this goes into our database. So we have this primary data, so the original data. We have this standard data with the quality report. So we highlight all the, for example, improbable values. And then we have metadata on these data, and this is what is exposed to the user. So we have a very simple basic search engine for the data user to filter and request the data. And this is extremely crucial step. So this goes to the approval to the data owner. If there was no this step, if the data were just open, I would not get a single data from any single population. So I had to assure many times people or data owners that their data will be safe with us and that we won't share their FAIR data with anyone without them approving it first. We have 2 actually groups that open their data, and I've talked to 4 more groups that are going to fully open their data, but this is still minority. And if this request is approved, and usually, condition is to be a co-author on a publication, then we send all the data in 1 standard format. So if you request the data from 10 population, you get them all in 1 file in a standard format. So it's very easy to use. So what I described is a project called SpyBirds Network and Database that I co-founded in 2018 or 19, I don't remember. Here is a Twitter hashtag if you want to follow us. And currently we have a network of more than 120 people. We hold a registry of all the populations, and idea is to actually really get everything that's there in the whole world. And currently we have 105 data sets of 26 species, which amounts to 2 million individual birds. So these are data on 2 million individuals that are marked uniquely and collected over cumulative 2,000 years. So it's actually really a lot of data. So some learnings from kind of leading this project is that really it's so important to consider and accommodate the stakeholders' needs, because otherwise, if people are not there with you, really with their heart, you won't achieve anything. Second, I think it's very important to provide a sense of community and a common goal. So what is our common goal? Our common goal is to save our data from disappearing. For many groups, they don't have sustainable archiving options in place. And the common goal is actually to use the wealth of these data to increase our knowledge about evolutionary and ecological processes, because that's a scientific drive, and really be persistent. So what I use is what I call snowballing technique. So you find some people that are really already from the start pro this kind of a project, and then the number of people is just increasing as a snowball. So as more people joins, more and more wants to join, and in the end you have few that, you know, they're just outliers and they just don't want to be outside, although they don't want to have their data fair. So it happens slowly. And what I've learned really through talking to many of these groups, because at the beginning I was really opponent pro open data, and I thought, well, why don't you want to make your data open? But talking to people, I really realized that open data brings different costs and benefits to different groups. So if you have a big group like Oxford Group, they have a lot of data, they have a lot of researchers, they're going to open their data because for them it doesn't cost them anything, because they have a huge people power to analyze the data and they already attract a lot of funding. On the other hand, you have some small groups that have only started 4 years ago, been just collecting the data to do some analysis, and you know what their funding for the future will depend on what they get from this data. So if somebody does this analysis before them, somebody who has a larger analytical power, a group might lose their future funding. So I really think I stopped judging people for not making their data open. And I also want to use this statement that fair data is more fair to anyone, for everyone, because it does make actually groups more equal. Because, for example, it makes all the data sets equally visible. It makes them all equally usable. So they all get the same chance, for example, to be included in large-scale group projects. And of course, main challenges really is funding. Funding these types of initiatives is difficult because they are not basic science, so you can't get typical scientific funding for them. But they are still, for example, in our case, not open data. And many funders don't want to fund non-open data, so we cannot achieve open data, we can achieve fair data. And of course, this funding is related to getting better technical support for, in this case, our initiative. And we want to become trusted repository. And in this sense, the training material from FAIRsFAIR's project have been very helpful to us. And with that, I would like to thank you. And yeah, this is my FAIRsFAIR Twitter handle, our website, and my Twitter handle. And if you have any questions, you can either tweet me or you can contact me on my email. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, and I changed roles. I will quickly introduce to you the last speakers of this morning, Maureen, and she joined the Software Heritage Group in 2017 and is part of a FAIRsFAIR working group on software. And she combines her presentation with Jared Koen, who's working at DANS, and from his role also worked in a task group on research software sustainability. I give you the floors now, Maureen.
Thank you, Margaret. Jerry will be sharing the slide deck. So please, Jerry, can you share our slides? And I'll have the pleasure to say next slide for a bit, and then it will be Jerry who will have control. I feel that we are not, Jerry, are you sharing the slides?
So let me know if you want me to step in, because I have access to your slides.
Okay, I will then share my on my side. Just a moment.
Yeah, it seems that we have lost Jerry somehow. I don't see him in the list.
He says he needs to get back in. So let me just share the slides and hope he'll join back in when it's his turn to speak.
It's okay, Marana.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, just a moment. So, okay. So, hi, everyone. And so today, thank you very much for inviting us to this roadshow and to presenting to you a hot subject, which is software, and we'll take a look on software with the FAIR angle. Next slide. We have a busy agenda for you today, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to keep it quick and short and sweet. We'll present some of the software in academia, some research initiatives regarding software, and pragmatic advice following the FAIR software route and using the Software Heritage Archive. I'm Marianne Green-Peter. I'm working on the Software Heritage Archive as a software engineer and metadata specialist. And with me there's Jerry Cohen. And next slide, please. So before diving into software in academia or FAIR and software, let's talk about software. What does it, many different people think different things on software, and what does it mean when you look at software? And we need to keep in mind that it's very important that software is first written like articles for people to read. So there's the source code, and it's only incidentally for machines to execute. Next slide. And in research, it plays different roles. You can see that software can be a tool, and it can be used in workflows like presented before with pipelines to process and produce data, but it's also can be a research outcome, a result, and it can be the object of research. For example, if research is done on software, on games, on gaming software, it can be the object of research. And this is why software is essential in modern research and should be kept and preserved for the long term alongside publication in open access repositories and open datasets repositories for data. So software and open source repositories are a pillar of open science. Next slide. Why are we here? There are really different needs that we need to look at when we think of software. There are researchers that need to find useful software. They need to get credit for the software they develop. There are laboratories and teams that want to track the software contributions and produce reports. And of course, we have the research organization. They need to know where the software assets are and who is behind them for technology transfer and impact metrics. To answer these needs, we should propose recommendations, guidelines, and infrastructures. Next slide. And so we want to create a FAIR ecosystem where software is really everywhere in this FAIR ecosystem. And when thinking of applying broadly the concept of FAIR to all objects, including software, we need to understand how complex it is, because software is everywhere. It's behind the repositories, it's behind the services, and it's also the digital objects themselves that need curation and need to be fair. And software is quite different from data. Next slide, please. And we should acknowledge that difference, because it has a specific nature which is different. And this discussion should take place to see if the FAIR principles for data are relevant for software and can be reused for software as they are. And we see that in some recommendation, there is a need for translation of the FAIR principles, specifically for software, to acknowledge that nature. Next slide. So in the FAIRsFAIR project, we had released an assessment report in October that you can check out. Well, I will share the link afterwards in the chat. And in this report, we had reviewed the literature that considers software in research and the FAIR principles, and seeing how those guidelines match up with the actual FAIR principles for data. And this resulted with 10 recommendations for the creation of FAIR guiding principles to recognize this and acknowledge how software is different from data. And there are other various initiatives working to enable FAIR for software in the Netherlands. And I will have Jerry to show you 2 of them. Please, Jerry.
Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry everybody about the little mix up there. Yeah, so thanks, Miranda. Basically, over the past couple of months, I've been part of an LCRDM task group collaborating on recommendations for research software sustainability in the Netherlands. The recommendations have some points related to both FAIR software and also the broader topic of software sustainability. And you'll be able to click on the DOI or follow the DOI and see the recommendations in a couple of days. They'll be published on the LCRDM website. I have to really mention that I wouldn't be a very good advocate for open science if I didn't give credit where credit is due, and mention that although I'm presenting the work here today, the bulk of the effort was done by Saskia van Eeuwijk and Miriam Roelofs, along with the group of core authors or core task members that you see highlighted in bold on the page. Okay, so the work is based on interviews conducted last year with researchers in the Netherlands investigating the topics of software archiving, so storage of source code, and also software sustainability, so covering aspects, for example, running software to reproduce results and the reuse of software in new contexts. So here's a bit of a link to reproducibility, like Efka mentioned earlier. The output takes the form of recommendations addressed towards various stakeholders in the science system. So you see here, for example, institutions, faculties, and researchers. The recommendations are clustered into 6 general headings. The first bundle of recommendations is related to creating awareness. So what I'm going to do is basically take you down and just mention through these 6 general headings or these general sections of recommendations, and then just maybe highlight one which is particularly interesting or can be kind of taken pragmatically and implemented or used more quickly. Okay, so related to creating awareness, there are many national and international opportunities for researchers to engage with the topic of software sustainability. So for example, joining the Netherlands Research Software Engineer community, or a working group of the Research Software Alliance, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later as well. The next bundle of recommendations relate to developing the relevant policies which are needed at all levels, and support staff at research institutions can help to put the topic on the agenda and enable both fair and sustainable software by developing and implementing policies and guidelines. And as Miranda mentioned earlier, the output of FAIRsFAIR is an ideal starting point for this, because it has this state-of-the-art review and also some guidelines about creating your own set of guidelines and policies within institutions. Okay, so another important aspect is, of course, the effort which is needed to stimulate the reuse of software. For example, researchers can enable this by obtaining a PID, a persistent identifier for their software, and actively reusing and citing the software developed by others. And training and support is needed to make sure that a culture of software sustainability can be fostered. Researchers need guidance regarding good practices for the development of sustainable software, and pragmatic advice on how they can make their software fair. So we'll touch on these also a little bit later, but the pressure can't just be pushed to one part of the system, and we really need to make sure that all of the elements within the science system are working together and all of the stakeholders are collaborating. Okay, so another point is that decision makers need to actively reward the development and reuse of software in science. So this goes again across all of the levels, from research funders down or over, across up. Yeah, and the metrics for the evaluation of researcher performance should take that into account as well. So making sure that when people are developing and reusing software, that there's some kind of recognition system in place for that. The last bundle of recommendations relate to the allocation of funding. Money makes the world go around, and unfortunately science is no exception to the rule. Funders should acknowledge software as an essential component of the science system and create the necessary funding lines to make sure that it's not all talk and there's also some action that can take place. Okay, so we have another poll now, which we should try and do, I think, as quickly as possible. So this is just a poll to understand your view on where responsibility really lies regarding this topic. And I think, yeah, the poll should have just popped up for you there now. maybe what we'll do as well, I'll just give you a couple of seconds more for answering that, and then we can move quickly ahead. Otherwise, I think we're going to run over. I'm ready in any case to share my own view. Yeah, so hopefully you'll agree, and we may come back to the poll results later and have a look at that, but hopefully you'll agree that we all have a part to play and that collaboration is vital for enabling both FAIR and software sustainability. Okay, and another example that I wanted to give of this kind of collaboration at the national level is the FAIR software route. So this was developed in collaboration between DONS and the Netherlands eScience Center. It's a lightweight resource which can be shared directly with researchers and data stewards. So once you have this link here, you know, it's kind of ready to go basically. It's a series of 5 steps to be followed, which will help make software more fair. And of course, behind each of the steps, there's more guidance available. So when you visit the tool, you can see, okay, what's really necessary and why is it important to use publicly accessible repository with version control, add a license, register your code in a community registry, enable citation of the software, and use software quality checklist. And I also just wanted to mention as well, specifically for the third point, register your code in a community registry, that the Netherlands eScience Center has a community registry that's already up and running, the research software directory. So maybe it's also an interesting thing to be able to immediately point people towards. Okay, and yeah, I'm going to hand over now to Miranda, and she's going to give some more specific advice for following the FAIR software route based on the work of the Software Heritage Initiative.
Thank you, Jerry. So Software Heritage, if you don't know it, its mission is to collect, preserve, and share all software source code to create the universal source code archive to all software, not just research software, but this will enable better research and better software. And we have some practical recommendation or help or tools to help you do and follow the FAIR software route. So to answer the FAIR software recommendation, I'm going to share with you this now. So first, prepare your public repository. So the first step in the FAIR software route is to have it publicly available in a code repository, but a code repository is not a long-term preservation method. So you can, by using it and saving its software heritage, kind of propose this access for the long term. So first, prepare your public repository with a README, authors, and license file. Next slide. Then you can save your code really quickly with just one click by putting the URL to your public repository in the Software Heritage archive in the Save Code Now feature. Next slide. And finally, you can reference this code with an identifier it's directly presented on the Software Heritage archive, which is the SWID. It's an intrinsic identifier and very easily found on the archive itself. Next slide. So we are looking for ambassadors from different research community to spread the word also on the Software Heritage Archive and all the tools and services that it can provide to enable FAIR software, but also to get community feedback to improve the research infrastructure and a whole community. Next slide. And we hope that you can also give your input if you are really interested in software and really interested in FAIR software to join the FAIR for Research Software Working Group, which is now active and really active on the RDA website. You can then join there. It's a joint working group, a RISA 4011 and RDA working group. Its main goal is defining FAIR principles for research software, but getting a community definition for that. And the first subgroup 1 output was shared in January, and at the moment we're working on the first full working group output. Next slide, please. The important thing to keep from that is that acknowledging software is a great step forward that we need to continue and to build this road and this bridge between our communities with collaboration to get fair software and open science. Next slide, please. So thank you very much. We are free here to answer your question on the chat or later on. Here are our handles, Twitter handles, and that's it for us.
Thank you very much, Moran and Jerry, not only for the content, but also logistically for helping us to stay on track. I think that was good, and I encourage your invitation that people ask their questions in the chat. For us, we will not really do a wrap-up of the program, but in a sense, we asked the speakers to help us do that. So each speaker provided us with their own take-home message, and we're going to ask you to pick your favorite take-home message, because the 80 or so of you who have been with us the last 2 hours, you've had a pretty broad program, assessment tools, software, data, organizations, funders, and so on. So of course, we hope you not only enjoyed these 2 hours, but you will do something with it. For instance, take up the invitation by Moran or any of the other encouragements that speakers gave you. And to help you do that, here are the take-home messages provided by the speakers themselves. And please pick one. We now have 81% voters. So can we get 100%, please? Would be lovely to get some feedback for the speakers, apart from what you already discussed in the chat. %90. And then I'm closing the poll. Thank you so much. And just sharing it briefly, there seems to be a lot of interest in Antitsa's message and also in the message by Jerry and Moran. Okay, this is a nice spread, I think. Thank you all so much. We've reached the end of this first FAIRsFAIR Roadshow. We were happy to have it in the country where FAIRsFAIR project leads are working and living, but that was not the intention. So thank you for your enthusiasm and joining us. Thanks to all the speakers once again for this diverse program. We will in touch with you with the link to recordings and the slides, and continue your good work towards the FAIR output. Thank you all.
Doei.